The morning sun cut through the dust hanging in the armory at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, casting long shadows across rows of precisely organized weapons. Staff Sergeant Kira Brennan ran her fingers along the barrel of an M40A6 sniper rifle, checking for the microscopic imperfections that most armorers would miss. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her hands moved with the kind of practiced precision that came from thousands of hours of repetition. The weapon was clean, perfectly maintained, exactly as it should be. The door burst open with enough force to rattle the gun racks. Gunnery Sergeant Wade Cutler strode in, his desert combat uniform still dusty from the field, followed by his spotter Sergeant Trevor Hastings and their third team member Corporal Dmitry Volkov. Cutler's voice filled the space before he even cleared the threshold. Got another confirmed kill at 1,300 meters, he announced to no one in particular. Wind was gusting at 15 miles per hour, had to compensate for the crosswind and the target's movement. Textbook shot. Kira continued her inspection, making a note on her maintenance log. The rifle's bolt needed adjustment, a minor issue, but one that could affect accuracy at extreme range. Cutler approached the counter, dropping his pack with theatrical casualness. "Brennan, my rifle needs cleaning. We've been out for 3 days, and I need it perfect for the next operation." He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You didn't know how to clean a rifle properly, right? I mean, they teach you that in armorer's school?" Kira set down the M40A6 and met his eyes briefly. "I'll have it ready by 1400 hours, Gunny." Hastings laughed from behind Cutler, a sharp bark that echoed off the concrete walls. "She's all business, this one. But she's never even fired most of these weapons she's supposed to maintain." Cutler grinned, picking up a cleaning rod from the counter and examining it like he was seeing one for the first time. "You know, Brennan, there's a big difference between maintaining weapons and actually using them in combat. Understanding the weapon, feeling how it responds under pressure, that's something you can't learn from a manual." He set the cleaning rod down with exaggerated care. "Maybe we should take you out to the range sometime, show you how these things actually work in the real world." Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Have you ever worked with someone who completely underestimated what you were capable of? Maybe you've experienced something similar in your own life. Kira reached for Cutler's rifle, a standard M40A5, and began the disassembly process. Her hands moved efficiently, each motion economical and exact. The rifle was dirtier than it should have been, sand in the action that could have caused a malfunction. She made no comment, simply continued her work. "You're pretty good at taking them apart," Cutler continued, watching her hands. "But shooting's a whole different skill set. It's about instinct, about reading the wind and the target, about having the nerve to pull the trigger when it counts." He turned to Hastings and Volkov. "Remember that female lieutenant we had last year? Qualified as a sharpshooter, but couldn't handle the pressure when rounds started coming back at us. Different kind of stress when someone's shooting back." Volkov nodded, setting his own rifle on the counter. "It is true. The range is controlled environment. Combat is chaos. Very different requirements." Kira examined the firing pin, noting where that suggested the weapon had been dry-fired repeatedly, a practice that could damage the mechanism. She replaced it with a new pin from her supplies, making another note in her maintenance log. The action cycled smoothly now, the bolt moving with the kind of fluid precision that defined a properly maintained weapon. Chief Warrant Officer Raymond Pack entered through the side door, carrying a requisition form. He was older than most of the Marines on base, his weathered face marking decades of service. He glanced at Cutler's group, then at Kira, and something knowing passed across his expression. "Morning, Gunny." "Staff Sergeant." "Morning, Chief," Kira replied, not looking up from her work. Pack moved to the parts cabinet, but Kira could sense his attention remained partially on the interaction at the counter. He had been an armorer longer than she had been alive, and he missed nothing that happened at his armory. Cutler seemed oblivious to Pack's presence, continuing his monologue. "I'm serious about that range time, Brennan. It will be good for you to understand what we're doing out there. How we're using these weapons you maintain. Might help you do your job better if you understood the tactical applications." He picked up his now-cleaned rifle, checking the action with the confidence of someone who had used weapons his entire adult life. "This is nice work, I'll give you that. Clean as I've ever seen it." Kira handed him 3 loaded magazines. "Ammunition's been stored at stable temperature and humidity. Should give you consistent performance." "See, that's what I'm talking about," Cutler said, addressing his team. "Technical knowledge is great, but it's not the same as operational experience." He turned back to Kira. "The offer stands, Staff Sergeant. Anytime you want to learn how to actually shoot one of these things, my team would be happy to show you the basics." The days that followed established a pattern that grated against Kira's patience like sand in a rifle action. Cutler's team treated the armory as their personal workshop, arriving at irregular hours with demands that bordered on orders despite Kira's equal rank. They would drop their weapons on the counter, often without proper clearing procedures, and launch into detailed descriptions of their missions that always seemed to emphasize their own skill while subtly questioning whether someone like her could truly understand the complexity of their work. On the 3rd day after their initial encounter, Cutler arrived with a malfunctioning scope. The reticles drifting, he announced, setting the weapon down harder than necessary. "I need it fixed before tonight's operation. Think you can handle that? Or should I get someone with more field experience to look at it?" Kira took the rifle without comment and began her examination. The scope mount was loose, a simple fix that should have been caught during basic maintenance. She tightened the mounting screws to precise torque specifications, then test-fired the weapon at the indoor range attached to the armory. 3 shots, each placed within a half-inch group at 50 meters. She returned the weapon to Cutler 20 minutes after he had dropped it off. He checked the scope, worked the action, then nodded. "Not bad. Still, there's a difference between fixing equipment and actually using it under stress. You ever been in a situation where you had to make a shot that mattered? Where people's lives depended on your accuracy?" Kira met his eyes for a long moment. "Your rifle's ready, Gunny. The scope's zeroed at 100 meters. You want to verify at distance before your operation." "That's what I mean," Cutler said, turning to Hastings, who had just entered. Technical answer, but no real understanding of the human element. Shooting's not just mathematics and mechanics. It's art. It's knowing when to take the shot and when to wait. It's feeling the weapon become part of you. Hastings grinned, leaning against the door frame. "Remember that compound raid last month? 3-story building, target in a window at 900 meters, wind gusting unpredictably. Gunny made the shot look easy, but there were a dozen variables he had to process in seconds. That's not something you can learn from a maintenance manual." Over the following week, the dynamic intensified. Cutler began bringing other Marines to the armory, using Kira's presence as a teaching opportunity. He would hold up different rifles, explaining their capabilities and limitations, occasionally directing questions at Kira that were phrased to expose what he assumed was her lack of field knowledge. When she answered with technical precision, he would smile and add, "Yes, but in actual combat, theory goes out the window. You need instinct." Corporal James Whitmore, a young rifleman who frequently visited the armory for ammunition requisitions, began to notice the pattern. He watched Kira work, observe how her hands moved with absolute confidence when handling weapons, how she could identify problems with a rifle by sound alone when cycling the action. One afternoon, after Cutler's team had left, he approached her workbench. "Staff Sergeant, can I ask you something?" Whitmore kept his voice low. "Where'd you learn to work on weapons like that? I've seen a lot of armorers, but the way you handle those rifles, it's different. More like how shooters handle them, not maintenance personnel." Kira continued cleaning a barrel, her brush strokes methodical. "Training, Corporal, same as everyone else." Whitmore nodded slowly, unconvinced but unwilling to push further. He left with his ammunition, but Kira caught him watching her with curiosity several more times over the following days. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thornhill made her first appearance in the armory on a Thursday morning. She was in her mid-40s, her uniform crisp despite the base's perpetual dust, as she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded in multiple combat zones. She spoke briefly with Chief Pack about equipment requisitions, then made her way to Kira's workbench. "Staff Sergeant Brennan, how are you settling in at Sentinel?" "Well, ma'am," Kira set down the rifle she had been working on. No issues with equipment or supplies. Thornhill picked up a cleaning rod, examined it with the casual interest of someone familiar with armories. I've been hearing interesting reports from Gunnery Sergeant Cutler. He seems to have taken a particular interest in your professional development. Kira's expression remained neutral. The gunny's been vocal about his opinions, ma'am. Yes, I've noticed that about Gunnery Sergeant Cutler. Thornhill set the rod down, her eyes meeting Kira's with meaning that went beyond the surface conversation. Sometimes the loudest voices in the room know the least about what's really happening. She glanced at Chief Pack, who was watching from across the armory. Chief, make sure Staff Sergeant Brennan has everything she needs. I suspect we'll be relying on her expertise more than some people realize. After Thornhill left, Chief Pack approached Kira's workbench. He said nothing, but placed a requisition form in front of her. It was for specialized ammunition, the kind used for extreme long-range precision shooting. Match-grade rounds that cost more than standard issue by an order of magnitude. The quantity requested was small, specific, and the form was marked for Kira's personal use. She looked up at Pack, who simply nodded once and returned to his own work. The form had been pre-approved by Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill. The turning point came on a Friday afternoon when the base was winding down for the weekend. Cutler entered the armory with unusual energy, followed by half a dozen Marines who seemed to sense something entertaining was about to happen. He approached Kira's workbench, where she was performing detail maintenance on a Barrett M82, carefully inspecting each component of the large-caliber rifle. Brennan, I've been thinking about our conversations, Cutler announced loud enough for everyone in the armory to hear. You maintain all these precision weapons, but I realized I've never actually seen you shoot. That seems like a gap in your professional development. How can you truly understand these systems if you've never experienced them under operational conditions? Kira continued her work, removing the bolt carrier group with practiced efficiency. I qualify with my service weapon annually, Gunny. My marksmanship scores are on file. Service pistol qualification, Cutler scoffed. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about real precision shooting. Understanding how these sniper systems actually perform at distance. He gestured to the Barrett she was working on. That rifle can reach out to 1,800 meters in the right hands. But you've probably never even fired it, have you? My job is to maintain the weapons, not to use them operationally. Exactly my point, Cutler said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. You're doing technical work without understanding the practical application. It's like a mechanic who's never driven a car, trying to tune an engine. He turned to address the growing audience. I'm making an official offer here. Tomorrow, Saturday, I'm organizing a range day for advanced marksmanship training. I'm personally inviting Staff Sergeant Brennan to attend as my guest. We'll start with basics and work our way up to longer distances. It'll be educational for everyone involved. The other Marines in the armory exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable with Cutler's patronizing tone, but others seemed intrigued by the prospect of seeing the quiet armorer attempt shots that usually took years to master. Hastings stepped forward, joining Cutler at the workbench. It's a generous offer, Staff Sergeant. Most people would jump at the chance to train with one of the best sniper teams on base. We could teach you things that aren't in any manual. Kira carefully set down the Barrett's bolt carrier, her movements deliberate. I appreciate the offer, Gunny, but I have maintenance schedules to complete tomorrow. The 3rd Platoon's weapons need inspection before their patrol rotation next week. Cutler's smile hardened slightly. Chief Pack can handle routine maintenance for one day. This is about your professional development, about understanding the weapons systems you're responsible for at a deeper level. He leaned against the workbench. Unless you're concerned you might not perform well. I understand if the idea of shooting in front of experienced operators makes you nervous. Not everyone has the temperament for precision shooting under observation. The implication hung in the air like cordite smoke. Volkov had joined them now, forming a semicircle around Kira's workbench. She's afraid, he said matter-of-factly. His natural response. Shooting at targets is different when people are watching, judging your performance. Chief Pack emerged from the parts room, his weathered face impassive but his eyes alert. He moved to stand near Kira's workbench, not intervening, but making his presence felt. Cutler either didn't notice or didn't care. "Look, Brennan, I'm trying to help you here. You're a good armorer. Nobody's questioning that. But there's a ceiling to how good you can be at maintaining precision weapons if you don't understand precision shooting. Tomorrow, 0900 at range 7. We'll have targets set up from 300 meters out to 1200. I'll personally walk you through each shot, explain what you're doing wrong, help you improve. It's a learning opportunity." Whitmore had been standing near the entrance, and now he spoke up. "Gunny, maybe if the staff sergeant says she's busy, we should respect that. Not everyone needs to be a shooter to be good at their job." Cutler rounded on him. "This isn't about needs, Corporal. This is about excellence, about pushing ourselves to be better than adequate." He turned back to Kira. "I'm putting together a demonstration for the entire operations section. Show them what real precision shooting looks like at distance. But it wouldn't be complete without showing the full spectrum from beginner to expert. You'd be doing the unit a service by participating." The pressure in the room had shifted. What had started as Cutler's personal challenge was being transformed into a unit event, something that would draw attention from across the base. Other Marines were already talking among themselves, word spreading that Gunnery Sergeant Cutler was organizing a shooting demonstration and had invited the armorer to participate as a novice example. Kira reassembled the Barrett with fluid efficiency, each component clicking into place with the precision of a master craftsman. The weapon was complete in under 2 minutes, faster than most shooters could achieve. She function-checked it, the action cycling with perfect smoothness, then set it aside and finally looked directly at Cutler. "What distances are you planning for this demonstration?" Cutler grinned, sensing victory. "Start at 300 for basics, then 600, 900, and I'll finish with shots at 1200 meters. Show everyone what's possible with proper training and experience." Kira held his gaze for a long moment. The armory had gone quiet, everyone watching the exchange. Even Chief Pack had stopped moving, waiting to see how she would respond. Her hands rested on the workbench, completely steady, and something in her posture had shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, but somehow changed the entire dynamic. "All right, Gunny," she said quietly. 0900 at range 7. I'll be there." Word of the demonstration spread through forward operating base Sentinel like wildfire through dry grass. By evening, it seemed every Marine on base knew that Gunnery Sergeant Cutler was organizing a shooting exhibition and that the quiet armorer had been volunteered to participate as a learning example. The mess hall buzzed with conversation about it. Marines placing informal bets on whether Staff Sergeant Brennan would even show up or if she would back out overnight. Kira spent the evening in the armory after most personnel had left for the day. She worked methodically through her maintenance queue, but Chief Pack noticed she spent extra time with a particular rifle case in the back storage room, one that required both her fingerprint and a separate authorization code to access. He said nothing, simply continued his own work and ensured they were alone. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystal clarity that made the desert beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. The sky was a hard blue dome, and visibility extended for miles in every direction. Range 7 sat at the eastern edge of the base, a stretch of hardpan and rocks that extended toward distant hills. Target stands had been erected at precise intervals, marked with range flags that snapped in the steady morning breeze. Cutler had arrived early with his team, setting up not just targets, but also a covered observation area with seating for spectators. He had turned this into a proper event, complete with a spotting scope station and a portable whiteboard where he had drawn diagrams of wind reading and bullet trajectory. By 0845, over 30 Marines had gathered, far more than Kira had expected. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill arrived at 0850, her presence lending official weight to what Cutler had framed as a training evolution. She took a position slightly apart from the main group, her arms crossed, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp and watchful. Captain Marcus Aldridge accompanied her, a lean intelligence officer with wire-rimmed glasses whom most Marines found unsettling for reasons they couldn't quite articulate. He carried a tablet and seemed more interested in it than the gathering crowd. Cutler stood near the firing line, checking his watch repeatedly. He had his personal rifle with him, a customized M40A5 with expensive optics and a stock that had been precision-fitted to his build. Hastings and Volkov flanked him, their own weapons equally impressive. The three of them presented the image of professional competence, warriors who had earned their confidence through countless hours of training and combat operations. At 0858, Kira emerged from the armory building carrying a long rifle case. She wore standard range attire, hearing protection around her neck, and her expression gave away nothing. Whitmore watched her approach and noticed something he had seen before but never consciously registered. Her walk was different here, outside the confines of the armory. More purposeful, more controlled. The walk of someone who had moved through far more dangerous terrain than a forward operating base range. "Good morning, Staff Sergeant," Cutler called out cheerfully. "Glad you decided to join us. I was starting to worry you might have reconsidered." He gestured broadly to the assembled crowd. "As you can see, we've got quite an audience. Good learning opportunity for everyone." He turned to address the spectators. "For those who just arrived, we're going to conduct a demonstration of precision marksmanship at extended ranges. I'll be showing proper technique at various distances, and Staff Sergeant Brennan has graciously agreed to participate so we can illustrate the learning curve for those new to long-range shooting." Several Marines shifted uncomfortably at his tone, but most seemed caught up in the anticipation of watching someone fail at something difficult. It was a common enough entertainment on military bases where boredom could be as dangerous as enemy action. Kira set her rifle case down on the shooting bench and opened it with care. The weapon inside was not a standard-issue rifle. It was a Macmillan TC-50, a massive bolt-action rifle chambered in .50 caliber BMG, designed for extreme long-range precision shooting. The rifle was clearly well-used but meticulously maintained, every surface clean, every component precisely fitted. Chief Pack, who had positioned himself near the armory building, allowed himself the smallest hint of smile. Cutler's confident expression flickered briefly. "That's quite a rifle, Brennan. Where'd you get access to that?" "Those aren't standard armory issue. Special requisition," Kira replied simply. She began removing the rifle from its case with movements that spoke of deep familiarity. The weapon seemed to belong in her hands in a way that standard rifles looked in the hands of most Marines. She checked the action, verified the barrel was clear, then began setting up her shooting position. "Well, that's an ambitious choice for your first time doing precision shooting," Cutler said, recovering his swagger. "The .50 cal has significant recoil. It can be intimidating for shooters who aren't used to heavy platforms." He raised his voice for the crowd. "The rifle Staff Sergeant Brennan has chosen is extremely powerful, but also extremely unforgiving. Small errors in technique get magnified at distance. It's not really a beginner's weapon, but sometimes we learn best by starting at the deep end." Hastings stepped forward with a tablet showing atmospheric data. Current conditions: wind steady from the west at 12 miles per hour, temperature 78 degrees, barometric pressure 29.12. He glanced at Kira. "Do you know how to factor wind drift into your calculations, Staff Sergeant? Or should Gunny walk you through it?" Kira had finished setting up her rifle and was now studying the distant targets through a handheld rangefinder. She seemed to be processing information that went beyond simple distance measurement, her eyes moving between the targets and the vegetation between positions, reading wind patterns from how grass bent and dust moved. Thornhill leaned slightly toward Aldridge and murmured something inaudible to anyone else. Aldridge nodded, his fingers moving across his tablet screen, pulling up what appeared to be classified files. His expression remained neutral, but there was anticipation in his eyes now. Cutler moved to center stage, his rifle held with practiced ease. "All right, everyone, let's begin with a demonstration of proper fundamentals at 300 meters. This is where we establish the basics: breath control, trigger squeeze, body position." He settled into a shooting position that was textbook perfect, his body aligned behind the rifle, his breathing visible even from a distance as he controlled it to the precise rhythm taught in every sniper school. The shot cracked across the range. Downrange, a radio operator called back the result. Center mass, 4 inches from bullseye. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Cutler stood, working the bolt with smooth efficiency. Now that's what proper technique looks like. Years of training, muscle memory, understanding your weapon system. He gestured toward Kira. Staff Sergeant, why don't you take a shot at the 300-meter target? Just try to apply the basics. Don't worry about precision yet. We're just looking for you to get rounds on target. Kira approached the firing line. The McMillan TC-50 Dwarf Standard Sniper Rifles, its massive barrel and chassis system designed for shots that most Marines never attempted. She settled behind it with movements that were economical and precise, her body forming around the weapon in a way that suggested thousands of repetitions rather than first-time familiarization. Her hands adjusted the scope with micro-movements, making calculations that seemed instinctive rather than deliberate. She checked her data card, though most observers assumed it was for show since Cutler had already announced the range. What they couldn't see was that her card contained atmospheric data from a weather station most Marines didn't know existed, factoring in humidity, air density, and Coriolis effect for the base's latitude. Take your time, Cutler said encouragingly. There's no pressure here. Just focus on the fundamentals I demonstrated. Kira's breathing slowed. Her finger moved to the trigger with the kind of deliberate control that came from training that went far beyond standard qualification courses. The rifle fired, its report significantly louder than Cutler's weapon, the 50 caliber round producing a sharp crack that made several spectators flinch. Dead center, the radio operator called back after a pause. Perfect bullseye. The crowd went quiet. Cutler's smile remained fixed, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Good shot. Beginner's luck has a way of showing up at closer ranges. Let's move to 600 meters. That's where we start to separate the casual shooters from those with real skill. He took his position again at 600 meters, firing with the same practice confidence. His shot was excellent, inside a 6-inch group from center. He stood and turned to the crowd. 600 meters is where wind reading becomes critical. You can't just aim and shoot anymore. You have to calculate drift, adjust for the bullet's trajectory over distance. This takes experience and trained judgment. Kira moved back to her position. This time, more people noticed the way she set up. Chief Pack watched from his position near the armory, his weathered face impassive, but his attention absolute. Whitmore found himself leaning forward, trying to understand what he was seeing. There was something about the way she touched the rifle, adjusted the scope, positioned her body. It was the movement of someone for whom this weapon was not a tool, but an extension of self. The wind had shifted slightly, a gust pattern that changed the drift calculations. Kira seemed to sense it rather than calculate it, her scope adjustment immediate and certain. She fired. The radio response was faster this time, less surprised. Dead center. Perfect shot. Volkov leaned toward Hastings and muttered something in Russian. Hastings nodded slowly, his expression shifting from smug confidence to something more cautious. They had both seen enough combat to recognize when something unexpected was happening. Cutler's jaw tightened. He maintained his encouraging tone, but it had developed an edge. Excellent shooting, Staff Sergeant. 2 perfect shots. Let's see how you handle 900 meters. This is where most shooters start to struggle. The bullet drop is significant, the wind effects are magnified, and you're shooting at a target that's barely visible to the naked eye. He turned to address the crowd with renewed energy. At 900 meters, we're looking at roughly 3 seconds of flight time. The bullet drops over 40 feet from bore line. Reading conditions becomes everything. He fired his demonstration shot. It was good, landing within 8 inches of center. A shot most Marines would be proud of. He stood and gestured for Kira to take her position, and there was challenge in his eyes now rather than condescension. Show us what you've got, Brennan. Kira checked her data again, but this time Captain Aldridge noticed she was reading different information than standard range cards would contain. She made a scope adjustment that seemed extreme for the distance, compensating for factors that shouldn't matter at 900 meters unless you understood ballistics at a level far beyond basic sniper training. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill pulled out her own rangefinder and checked the wind flags downrange. She glanced at Aldridge, who was now watching Kira with the focused intensity of someone witnessing something significant. His tablet screen showed a file marked with classification headers that most of the gathered Marines would never have clearance to read. Kira settled into her shooting position with the kind of stillness that seemed to spread outward, making even the spectators unconsciously quiet their movement. Her breathing cycle was mathematically precise. Her trigger finger moved with micrometer control, and when the rifle fired, it seemed less like she pulled the trigger and more like she simply allowed the weapon to complete a process that had become inevitable. The radio's silence lasted longer this time. When the spotter finally spoke, his voice carried disbelief. Perfect center. Dead on bullseye. The crowd's murmur was louder now, confused. 2 perfect shots could be luck. 3 perfect shots at increasing distances began to look like something else entirely. Several Marines who had been casually watching were now paying complete attention. Chief Pack allowed himself a broader smile. Though he turned away, so most couldn't see it. Cutler stared downrange, his confidence visibly shaken. His hands moved to his rifle with less certainty than before. The atmosphere at Range 7 had transformed from casual entertainment to focused attention. Marines who had been chatting among themselves now stood in near silence, watching Kira with the kind of intensity usually reserved for watching actual combat footage. The impossible was happening in front of them, and military personnel were trained to recognize when reality was diverging from expectation. Cutler recovered his composure with visible effort. He straightened his shoulders and turned to face the crowd with renewed determination. All right, 3 excellent shots. Staff Sergeant Brennan clearly has more experience than she let on. But 1,200 meters is where we separate the good shooters from the elite. This is extreme long-range shooting. We're talking about bullet flight time over 4 seconds, drop exceeding 100 feet, and wind drift that can push the round several feet off course. He picked up his rifle with deliberate confidence. This is where experience and training really matter. He settled into his position with extra care, taking nearly 2 minutes to make his calculations and adjustments. The crowd watched in respectful silence as he controlled his breathing, steadied his position, and finally fired. The shot echoed across the range, and everyone waited for the radio report. Hit, 12 inches left of center. Good shot, still in the scoring zone. Cutler stood, and while the shot was objectively excellent, landing anywhere near the target at 1,200 meters, it wasn't the demonstration of superiority he had planned. He turned to Kira with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your turn, Staff Sergeant. Let's see if your streak continues at a distance where even experienced snipers struggle. Kira approached the firing line, and something in her bearing had shifted. The quiet deference that had characterized her interactions in the armory was gone, replaced by absolute focus. She checked her rifle with hands that moved with surgical precision, made scope adjustments that seemed impossibly minute, and then did something that made several experienced Marines inhale sharply. She pulled out a small device that measured air density and used it to make additional calculations on her data card. That's a Kestrel weather meter, Hastings said quietly to Volkov. Those are what competitive precision shooters use. Why would an armorer have one of those? Volkov didn't answer. He was watching Kira's setup process with a growing recognition of someone who had seen similar procedures before in very different contexts. His expression had shifted from smug superiority to something approaching concern. Whitmore moved closer to Chief Pack, who stood like a statue watching the scene unfold. Chief, he whispered, who is she really? Pack's weathered face showed the faintest hint of satisfaction. Someone who's been very patient. Corporal, keep watching. Kira completed her calculations and settled behind the Macmillan TAC-50. The rifle seemed to become part of her, an organic extension rather than a mechanical tool. She made a final scope adjustment, a full milled of correction that would seem excessive to most shooters, but which accounted for factors they hadn't considered. The Coriolis effect at this latitude, the specific ballistic coefficient of her ammunition, the way wind speed varied at different elevations between her position and the target. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the few Marines who had been skeptical were now paying complete attention. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill stood with her arms crossed, watching not just Kira, but also Captain Aldridge, who had moved closer to the firing line with his tablet held at ready. Kira's breathing cycle began. 4 counts in, hold for 3, 4 counts out, and in that moment between breaths when the body is perfectly still, she pressed the trigger. The rifle's report was sharp and immediate, the .50 caliber round departing at over 2,700 feet per second. 4.3 seconds passed. They felt like minutes. Perfect center mass, the radio operator called, his voice carrying undisguised shock. Dead center bullseye at 1,200 meters. The silence that followed was profound. Someone dropped a water bottle, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. Marines looked at each other, trying to process what they had just witnessed. 4 consecutive perfect shots at increasing distances, culminating in a bullseye at 1,200 meters with a .50 caliber rifle. The probability of that being luck had just dropped to near zero. Cutler's face had gone pale beneath his tan. His mouth opened and closed twice before he found words. "That's remarkable shooting, Staff Sergeant. Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" Kira stood and began making notes in her data book with the kind of clinical detachment of someone recording routine test results. "Training, Gunny. Same as everyone else." "That's not the same as everyone else," Hastings said, his voice tight. "That's world-class precision shooting. That's Olympic-level accuracy combined with military-grade field conditions." He turned to Cutler. "Boss, I've seen maybe 3 people in my entire career make shots like that consistently." Volkov had gone very quiet, staring at Kira with an expression that mixed respect and something else. Recognition, perhaps, or the dawning awareness that he had been badly mistaken about something fundamental. "In Russian Special Forces," he said slowly, "we had rumors about American Sniper. Ghost shooter, they called. Impossible shots from impossible distances. We thought it was propaganda, American legend-making. But the details were always consistent. Always .50 caliber, always extreme range, always perfect accuracy." "Stop," Cutler said sharply, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked at Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill, who had moved closer to the firing line. "Ma'am, did you know about this?" Thornhill's expression was carefully neutral. "Know about what, Gunnery Sergeant?" "That one of my Marines is an exceptionally skilled marksman. I know the capabilities of all my personnel." She glanced at Kira. "Staff Sergeant Brennan requested special ammunition through proper channels. I approved it because she demonstrated need and competence." Captain Aldridge had his phone to his ear now, speaking in low tones that suggested he was calling someone with significant authority. His eyes never left Kira, and there was something in his expression that suggested wheels were turning at levels far above a forward operating base demonstration. The crowd of Marines had begun to fracture into groups, urgent conversations breaking out as people tried to understand what they had witnessed. Whitmore stood frozen, pieces clicking into place in his mind. The way she handled weapons in the armory, her absolute confidence with every rifle system, the specialized equipment, Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill's knowing looks, Chief Pack's quiet satisfaction. Cutler stood at the firing line, his rifle hanging loosely in one hand, his carefully constructed demonstration having transformed into something he no longer controlled. He looked at the targets downrange, then back at Kira, then at his own weapon as if it had somehow betrayed him. The mathematical impossibility of what had just happened warred with the physical evidence that everyone had witnessed. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice lacking its usual command presence. "You're an armorer. You maintain weapons. You've never been listed on any sniper roster, never attended advanced marksmanship schools that I'm aware of. How is this possible?" Kira was cleaning her rifle with methodical care, running a bore snake through the barrel with the same attention to detail she brought to every weapon that crossed her workbench. "Maybe you never asked the right questions, Gunny. You assumed maintenance personnel couldn't shoot because they weren't assigned to shooting positions. That's a logical fallacy." Hastings had moved closer, his earlier mockery completely evaporated. "Staff Sergeant, with all respect, that's not just shooting. That's elite-level precision marksmanship. The kind of skill that takes years of specialized training and constant practice. You can't just pick that up from maintaining rifles. He glanced at Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill. Ma'am, what exactly is Staff Sergeant Brennan's full service record? Thornhill's expression remained neutral, but there was steel beneath it. Gunnery Sergeant, I suggest you focus on your own performance and let me worry about my personnel assignments. Staff Sergeant Brennan is exactly where she needs to be, doing exactly what she's qualified to do. The gathered Marines had split into clear factions now, so we're excited, energized by witnessing something extraordinary. Others looked uncomfortable, realizing they had participated in what was starting to look like a massive miscalculation. A few, like Whitmore, simply looked stunned, trying to reconcile the quiet armorer they thought they knew with the shooter they had just watched perform impossible feats. Chief Pack had moved to stand near Kira, his presence protective in a way that suggested he had been waiting for this moment. He addressed Cutler directly, his voice carrying the weight of decades of service. Gunny, in my 40 years in the Corps, I've seen a lot of Marines make a lot of assumptions, usually about people who don't fit their expectations. Usually they end up learning expensive lessons. He gestured toward the targets downrange. Consider this your education. Cutler's face flushed red. He turned to his team, looking for support, but Hastings and Volkov were both studying Kira with expressions that mixed respect and wariness. They had seen enough combat to recognize a predator when one was revealed, and what stood before them was someone operating at a level they had only heard about in classified briefings and late-night speculation. Captain Aldridge finished his phone call and approached the group. His expression was carefully controlled, but there was urgency in his movements. Lieutenant Colonel, I need to speak with you and Staff Sergeant Brennan privately. There's been a development. Before Thornhill could respond, Cutler stepped forward, his ego driving him toward a final demonstration even as his common sense screamed warnings. Wait, one more shot. He pointed toward the distant hills beyond the established range, where a rocky outcropping stood at what had to be at least 1,800 meters. Put a target out there. If Staff Sergeant Brennan is as skilled as these 4 shots suggest, she should be able to hit extreme range. That's beyond safe range protocol, Hastings said immediately. We don't have spotters positioned that far out, and the terrain gets complicated. That's not a demonstration. That's showing off. Exactly my point, Cutler said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Real shooting isn't about controlled conditions on a measured range. It's about adapting to combat scenarios, making shots that matter under pressure. He looked directly at Kira. Unless you're only confident when everything's perfect and measured. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a flare. Several Marines shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Cutler was pushing beyond professionalism into something personal and potentially dangerous. But others leaned forward, caught up in the spectacle, wanting to see how far this impossible display could go. Gunny, that's enough, Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill said, her voice carrying command authority. This demonstration is over. Everyone return to your duty stations. But Cutler wasn't listening. He had moved to his spotting scope, ranging the distant outcropping. 1,840 meters. Winds variable but steady from the west. There's a light-colored rock formation that would make a perfect aiming point. He turned to face the crowd. This is what separates theory from practice. Anyone can make calculated shots at known distances with perfect conditions. Combat doesn't give you that luxury. Kira had finished cleaning her rifle and was securing it in its case. She moved with unhurried precision, ignoring Cutler's grandstanding. Chief Pack watched her with knowing eyes, recognizing the signs of someone who had made this decision before, probably dozens of times, in circumstances far more consequential than a forward operating base demonstration. Staff Sergeant Brennan, Cutler called out, unable to let it go. One shot at combat range. Show us if you're really as good as those 4 perfect shots suggest, or if you're just good at control conditions. Aldridge stepped forward, his intelligence officer's instincts recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond the simple demonstration it had started as. Gunnery Sergeant Cutler, I strongly advise you to stand down. You're creating a situation that could have consequences you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Captain, Cutler shot back. I understand that someone who can shoot like that should be on the shooting roster, should be in the field, should be taking high-value targets. Instead, she's hiding in an armory, maintaining other people's weapons. That doesn't make sense unless there's something we're not being told. Volkov had gone very still, his eyes moving between Kira and the distant outcropping. "Boss," he said quietly, "I think maybe we should listen to Captain." Kira closed her rifle case with a decisive click. The sound carried across the now-silent range like a judge's gavel. She looked at Cutler directly for the first time since the demonstration had begun, and something in her eyes made him take an unconscious step backward. The range had become a stage with an audience that didn't fully understand the performance they were witnessing. Kira's gaze held Cutler's for 3 long seconds before she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying absolute certainty across the silent space. 1,840 meters in variable wind, with an unapproved target beyond established safety protocols. You're asking me to violate range regulations to satisfy your ego. I'm asking you to prove you're not just a one-trick pony who got lucky 4 times. Cutler snapped back, his professionalism completely abandoned now. Because right now, this looks like an elaborate setup. Perfect conditions, measured ranges, all very controlled. Combat doesn't work that way. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill moved between them, her command presence finally asserting full control. "Gunnery Sergeant Cutler, you are officially ordered to stand down. This demonstration is concluded. Captain Aldridge, take Staff Sergeant Brennan to my office. Everyone else, clear this range immediately." But the damage was done. The challenge had been issued publicly, witnessed by over 30 Marines who would carry the story across the entire base within hours. Cutler had framed it as a question of combat authenticity versus range performance, and in military culture, that distinction mattered. Several Marines in the crowd were already murmuring, their respect for Kira's shooting tempered by questions about whether she could perform under real pressure. Kira looked at Thornhill, then at Aldridge, reading something in their expressions that the gathered crowd couldn't see. She reopened her rifle case with deliberate slowness. "Ma'am, with respect, if I walk away from this challenge, the question will follow me. Gunny Cutler has made this about more than shooting. He's made it about credibility. Staff Sergeant, you don't need to prove anything to anyone here," Thornhill said, but there was resignation in her voice. She knew how military gossip worked, how quickly reputation could be damaged by unanswered challenges. Captain Aldridge checked his watch, then his phone, then made a decision that seemed to cost him something. He pulled Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill aside, and they had a brief, intense conversation in voices too low for others to hear. Thornhill's expression shifted from resistant to resigned. She nodded once, sharply. Aldridge turned to address the crowd, his intelligence officer's authority cutting through the murmuring. "Everyone not directly involved in range operations will move back to the observation area. This has become an official training evolution under my supervision. Anyone who discusses the specifics of what they see here today without proper authorization will face charges under operational security protocols. Is that understood?" The crowd shuffled back, confused but compliant. Military personnel understood when classification language was being invoked, even if they didn't understand why. Whitmore found himself next to Chief Pack, both of them now standing at the boundary between official observers and the firing line where something significant was clearly about to happen. "What's going on, Chief?" Whitmore whispered. "Why is an intelligence officer taking control of a shooting demonstration?" Pack's weathered face showed satisfaction mixed with concern. "Because it stopped being a demonstration about 5 minutes ago, Corporal. Now it's about operational security and protecting assets that some people don't even know exist." Kira had her rifle out again, but this time she also retrieved a second case from her vehicle, one that Chief Pack had helped her transport from secure storage the night before. She opened it to reveal ammunition that looked similar to standard .50 caliber rounds, but with subtle differences that marked them as specialized precision loads. Match-grade rounds with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, each one costing more than most Marines made in a day. Hastings recognized them immediately. Holy God, those are Hornady AMEX rounds. Those are what competitive precision shooters use for extreme long range. He looked at Volkov. Nobody issues those unless they're planning shots beyond 2,000 meters. Volkov had gone pale. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and stared at the response with growing alarm. "Boss," he said to Cutler quietly, "we need to apologize and walk away right now. I just confirmed something." Cutler ignored him, his focus locked on Kira with the intensity of someone whose entire self-image was crumbling. He had built his identity on being an elite shooter, on being better than the average Marine, on having skills that commanded respect. Watching someone demolish that image with casual perfection had triggered something beyond reason. Kira set up her position with even more care than before. She checked multiple data points, used her weather meter to measure conditions at ground level, and pulled out a ballistic calculator that most Marines had never seen. The device incorporated GPS data, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, and even the Earth's rotation to provide firing solutions for extreme distances. At 1,800 meters, you're looking at over 5 seconds of flight time, Hastings said, speaking more to himself than anyone else. The bullet drops over 200 feet from boreline. Wind drift at that distance with variable conditions could push the round 3 feet or more off target. He shook his head slowly. This isn't shooting anymore. This is applied physics at the edge of what's possible. Captain Aldridge had positioned himself where he could watch both Kira and the gathered crowd. His phone was in his hand, and he appeared to be live-streaming the event to someone with considerable authority. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression suggesting she was watching something she had hoped to avoid but now had no choice but to allow. Kira made her final calculations and loaded a single round into the Macmillan TAC-50. The action closed with mechanical precision, and she settled behind the rifle with the stillness of someone who had done this hundreds of times before under circumstances far more stressful than a forward operating base demonstration. The wind shifted, a gust that changed the entire calculation. Kira adjusted her scope with a correction that seemed impossibly large, compensating for factors that shouldn't matter at that distance unless you understood ballistics at a level taught only in the most classified programs. Her breathing cycle began, and the entire range fell into a silence so profound that the wind itself seemed to quiet in anticipation. She fired. The .50 caliber round departed with its characteristic crack, and then everyone waited. 5.2 seconds of flight time, an eternity measured in heartbeats and held breath, and the growing realization that something far beyond a simple shooting demonstration was unfolding. The radio crackled to life with a voice that sounded genuinely shaken. Impact confirmed. Dead center on the light-colored rock formation at 1,840 meters. Perfect hit. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The gathered Marines stood frozen in a moment of collective cognitive dissonance, watching something that their training and experience told them should not be possible. 5 consecutive perfect shots at increasing distances, culminating in a bullseye at nearly 2,000 meters in variable wind conditions. The probability of that being anything other than world-class expertise had just dropped to zero. Cutler stood with his mouth slightly open, his rifle hanging forgotten in one hand. His face had gone through pale and arrived at a gray color that suggested shock approaching a medical condition. He tried to speak twice before words actually emerged. "Who are you?" Kira stood from her shooting position and began the methodical process of clearing her weapon. She removed the magazine, checked the chamber, verified the rifle was safe, then began breaking it down for transport. Her movements had the quality of ritual, performed thousands of times in dozens of locations under every imaginable condition. Captain Aldridge's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 10 seconds, then held it out toward Kira. "Ma'am, it's SOCOM headquarters. They're requesting confirmation of your status." The word "ma'am" hit the gathered crowd like a flashbang grenade. Junior enlisted used "ma'am" for officers, not for staff sergeants. Aldridge was a captain, senior to any non-commissioned officer. Yet he had used the term with deference that suggested rank structures far more complex than anyone had understood. Kira took the phone, listened briefly, then responded in a voice that carried across the silent range. Phantom Actual, identity confirmed. Request status remains classified for ongoing operations. She paused, listening. Understood. I'll file a full incident report within the hour. She ended the call and handed the phone back to Aldridge. Phantom, Volkov said, the word coming out like a curse in Russian before he switched to English. You are Phantom, the ghost sniper. We had briefings about you in Spetsnaz election. They told us you were propaganda, American psychological operations to make us afraid of snipers we could not see. Hastings had gone very still, his sniper's instincts processing information at maximum speed. Phantom is real? The confirmed kills at over 3,000 meters? The high-value target eliminations in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq? He looked at his own rifle, then at Kira's Macmillan, then back at Kira herself. The longest confirmed kill in Marine Corps history. That was you? Kira continued her weapon maintenance, not confirming or denying, but her silence was answer enough. Chief Pack moved to stand beside her, his protective stance making it clear that whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill stepped forward, her command voice cutting through the shocked murmuring. Listen carefully, all of you. What you have witnessed here today is classified at the highest levels. Staff Sergeant Brennan operates under special assignment that I authorized and that SOCOM directly supervises. Her cover as an armorer allows her to maintain operational readiness while providing valuable service to this base. The fact that her identity has been compromised is a serious operational security breach. But Gunny Cutler challenged her. Someone in the crowd objected. You push her to shoot. And Gunnery Sergeant Cutler will be answering for that in my office within the hour, Thornhill said coldly. But everyone here shares responsibility for maintaining operational security now. Captain Aldridge will be conducting individual briefings with each of you regarding classification protocols and the consequences of unauthorized disclosure. Cutler finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and unsteady. I didn't know. You never told me. How was I supposed to know that the quiet armorer was some kind of legendary sniper? That's precisely the point, Gunny, Aldridge said, his intelligence officer's demeanor shifting from observational to instructional. Operational security means compartmentalized information. You weren't told because you didn't need to know. Your assumption that an armorer couldn't shoot at an elite level was exactly the cover that made Staff Sergeant Brennan effective in her role. Whitmore had moved closer to Chief Pack, processing everything he had witnessed. The way she handled weapons in the armory, he said quietly. The way she moved. I kept thinking there was something different about her, but I couldn't place it. That's because you were seeing someone who had spent years operating at a level most Marines never reach, Pack replied. Someone who had made shots in combat that you only read about in after-action reports. Someone who saved American lives from distances so extreme that the enemy never even knew they were being targeted. He looked at Cutler with undisguised contempt. And you thought you could teach her how to shoot. The crowd had begun to fragment, Marines breaking into small groups as they processed what they had learned. Some looked excited, energized by having witnessed something extraordinary. Others looked troubled, realizing they had participated in mockery directed at someone who operated at a level they could barely comprehend. A few, like Hastings and Volkov, looked at Kira with professional respect, mixed with something approaching awe. Cutler stood isolated, his team members having unconsciously moved away from him. His entire identity had been built on being an elite shooter, someone whose skills commanded respect and authority. In the span of less than an hour, he had been revealed as mediocre by comparison, his condescension and mockery directed at someone who operated in a completely different category of expertise. How many confirmed kills? He asked, his voice barely audible. At extreme range. How many? That information is classified, Aldridge said firmly. What you need to know is that Staff Sergeant Brennan has served her country with distinction in roles that most Marines will never know about. Your behavior toward her has been unprofessional and damaging to operational security. You will report to Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill's office at 1400 hours to discuss your future at this base." Kira had finished securing her rifle and now stood facing the assembled Marines. Her quiet demeanor had returned, but there was steel beneath it now, visible in a way it hadn't been before. She wasn't hiding anymore, and the authority she carried was undeniable. "For the record," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the range, "I never asked for this demonstration. I never claimed to be anything other than an armorer." Gunnery Sergeant Cutler made assumptions based on his own biases and pushed until this situation became unavoidable. She looked directly at him. "You wanted to see combat-level shooting. You got it. I hope it was educational." The afternoon sun had shifted position by the time Captain Aldridge's radio erupted with urgent traffic. "All stations, this is Operations Center. We have eyes on high-value target, designation Scorpion 6, approximately 2,300 meters northeast of base perimeter. Target is coordinating mortar team preparing to engage base facilities. Request immediate sniper support." The gathered Marines went rigid with combat awareness. Mortar attacks on forward operating bases killed indiscriminately, and 2,300 meters was beyond the effective range of most counter-sniper capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill was already moving toward the operations center when Aldridge caught her arm. "Ma'am, we have Phantom on site. She's set up, weapons hot, and she's closer to the target than anyone we could deploy from the sniper teams." Thornhill looked at Kira, who had already begun reassembling her rifle with movements that had shifted from methodical to urgent. The demonstration was over. This was combat operations, and every second of delay increased the risk to American lives. "Staff Sergeant Brennan," Thornhill said formally, "you are authorized to engage high-value target at your discretion. Rules of engagement are weapons free on confirmed hostile forces preparing to attack this installation." Kira's transformation was immediate and total. The quiet armorer disappeared, replaced by something predatory and focused. She had her rifle assembled in under 30 seconds, loading specialized ammunition while simultaneously processing targeting data that Aldridge was feeding her from intelligence updates. The casual observers from the demonstration were now witnessing an actual combat operation unfolding in real time. "Target is in a depression between two hills," Aldridge reported, reading from his tablet. "Wind conditions are variable, gusting 12 to 18 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature 92 degrees, falling as sun angle decreases. Target has 3 security personnel and is using a military-grade rangefinder to plot mortar trajectories." Kira had moved to a different firing position, one that gave her a better angle on the northeastern approach. She set up her rifle with absolute efficiency, no wasted motion, every action serving the immediate purpose of preparing for an extreme-range engagement that could save dozens of lives. Chief Pack had moved to support her, setting up a spotting scope without being asked and calling out environmental data. Wind shift, now 15 steady from northwest. Temperature drop of 3 degrees. Barometric pressure stable at 20.85. Hastings found himself moving forward despite his earlier shock, his professional instincts overriding personal feelings. Range to target is 2,300 meters. Elevation change is approximately 200 feet. Target is lower than your position. He glanced at Kira, then made a decision. "I can spot for you if you need it." Kira nodded once, accepting the offer without comment. Whatever had happened earlier was irrelevant now. Lives were at stake, and professionalism mattered more than ego. She made rapid calculations on her ballistic computer, factoring in distance, wind, elevation change, air density, and the Coriolis effect at their latitude. "Flight time will be approximately 6.4 seconds, she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Target is stationary, but has cover within 3 steps. I get 1 shot before they relocate." Cutler stood frozen 20 feet away, watching the woman he had mocked prepare for a shot that he knew was beyond his capabilities. He had made 1,000-meter shots in combat and considered himself accomplished. What Kira was attempting was in a different category entirely the kind of extreme-range precision that appeared in classified after-action reports and special operations briefings. Volkov had his own binoculars up, scanning the distant terrain. "I see movement northeast sector between the two prominent hills. Multiple personnel. One appears to be setting up targeting equipment." "That's our mortar spotter," Aldridge confirmed. "If they get those tubes ranged on our position, we're looking at sustained bombardment. Our counter-battery systems can suppress them eventually, but not before they get several rounds off." He looked at Kira. "You're our best option for stopping this before it starts." Kira had settled into her final shooting position, the Macmillan TC-50 anchored solidly, her body forming a stable platform behind the massive rifle. She controlled her breathing with mathematical precision, reducing her heart rate through techniques taught only in the most advanced sniper programs. The scope showed her a magnified view of distant terrain where small figures moved with hostile intent. "Target acquired," Hastings called out from the spotting scope. "Male subject, military age, holding what appears to be a laser rangefinder. 2 security personnel flanking, both armed with 8-pattern rifles. 3rd security element to the north providing overwatch. Wind shift," Chief Pack reported. "Gusting to 19 miles per hour, northwest component increasing." Kira made a scope adjustment, a full 3 mil-dots of correction that accounted for the extreme wind drift at that distance. The mathematics were complex, the variables numerous, but she processed them with the speed of someone who had done similar calculations hundreds of times under far worse conditions. In Syria, she had made shots at this distance while taking indirect fire. In Afghanistan, she had engaged targets at extreme range, while enemy forces actively searched for her position. This was difficult, but not impossible. "Target is moving," Volkov called out. "He's repositioning the rangefinder, getting ready to feed coordinates to the mortar team." "Engaging," Kira said quietly. The word was calm, professional, carrying no more emotion than if she were announcing routine maintenance completion. Her breathing cycle reached the perfect moment between heartbeats. Her finger pressed the trigger with pressure measured in ounces. The rifle fired, the .50 caliber round departing at over 2,700 feet per second, beginning a trajectory that would arc through the air for more than 6 seconds before impacting a target smaller than a basketball at a distance of nearly 1.5 miles. The gathered Marines held their breath collectively. 6.4 seconds felt like an eternity. Aldridge had his phone to his ear, receiving real-time updates from observers with Overwatch capabilities. His expression remained neutral, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the device. "Impact," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Target down. High-value target eliminated. Mortar team is scattering without coordination. Security personnel are retreating in disarray. The immediate threat to this base has been neutralized." The Marines erupted in restrained celebration, the kind of controlled response that military personnel showed when victory came at the cost of someone's life, even an enemy combatant. Whitmore found himself grinning despite the gravity of what had just happened. Hastings had stepped back from the spotting scope with an expression that mixed professional respect with something approaching disbelief. Cutler stood alone, watching Kira secure her weapon and begin the post-engagement protocols that were second nature to her. He had challenged her competence, questioned her capabilities, mocked her role, and in the span of 2 hours had watched her demonstrate skills that exceeded anything he had achieved in his entire military career, culminating in a combat engagement that had just saved American lives at a distance he could barely comprehend. The operations center confirmed complete dispersal of the hostile mortar team within minutes of Kira's shot. Intelligence intercepts picked up enemy communications describing confusion and panic after their coordinator had been eliminated by what they believed was an impossible shot from an unseen position. The psychological impact of extreme-range precision extended far beyond the single eliminated target, disrupting enemy operations across the entire sector. Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill returned from the operations center with a tablet showing overhead surveillance footage of the engagement. She approached Kira, who was conducting post-mission maintenance on her rifle with the same meticulous care she brought to every weapon system. "Staff Sergeant Brennan, that was exceptional work. Preliminary estimates suggest your engagement prevented a coordinated attack that could have resulted in significant American casualties. Just doing my job, ma'am, Kira replied, not looking up from her work. The rifle's barrel needed cleaning, the action required lubrication, and her ammunition expenditure needed to be logged. The administrative requirements of combat operations continued regardless of the dramatic circumstances. Captain Aldridge approached with his phone still active, clearly in communication with higher authority. SOCOM sends their compliments and confirms your engagement is being written up for commendation. They're also requesting a full debrief on how your operational security was compromised. He glanced meaningfully at Cutler, who stood at a distance looking like he wanted to disappear into the desert floor. That can wait until after proper debriefing protocols, Thornhill said. Right now, we need to address the immediate situation. She turned to face the assembled Marines, most of whom were still processing what they had witnessed. Everyone who was present for today's events will report to the Operations Center for individual classification briefings. You have seen capabilities that are vital to American operations in this theater. Unauthorized disclosure will result in criminal charges under the Espionage Act. Captain Aldridge will coordinate the briefing schedule. The crowd began to disperse slowly, Marines breaking into small groups and speaking in hushed tones. The excitement of witnessing both an impossible demonstration and an actual combat engagement competed with the sobering reality of classification requirements and operational security protocols. Several cast glances back at Kira, seeing her differently now, understanding that the quiet armorer had been something far more significant all along. Hastings approached hesitantly, his earlier mockery now a source of visible shame. Staff Sergeant, I owe you an apology. A serious one. I participated in behavior that was unprofessional and disrespectful. I made assumptions based on gender and assignment rather than capability. He met her eyes directly. What you demonstrated today, both on the range and in actual combat, is beyond anything I've achieved in 12 years as a sniper. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Kira looked up from her maintenance work. Apology accepted. Sergeant, you spotted for me when it mattered. That counts for something. Volkov stepped forward next, his expression serious. In Russian military, we study American sniper tactics extensively. Phantom was always presented as possibly mythical propaganda designed to create fear. Now I know truth. He extended his hand. It is an honor to have witnessed your capabilities, even if circumstances were not ideal. She shook his hand briefly, then returned to her work. The professional acknowledgement meant something, but her focus remained on her equipment and responsibilities. Chief Pack had been quietly organizing Kira's gear, preparing it for transport back to secure storage. He worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who had supported special operations personnel for decades. When the area had cleared somewhat, he spoke quietly. You handled that well. Could have been a lot worse. Could have been avoided entirely if Gunny Cutler had just done his job and left me to do mine, Kira replied, a hint of frustration breaking through her professional calm. True enough, but now the base knows what they've got. Might make your job harder in some ways, easier in others. Pack secured the final case. Either way, you saved lives today. That's what matters. Cutler had been standing in isolation, watching the various interactions with an expression that cycled through shame, anger, and resignation. Finally, he approached, each step seeming to cost him something. His earlier swagger had completely evaporated, replaced by the posture of someone confronting a mistake too large to easily process. Staff Sergeant Brennan, he began, his voice rough. I don't know where to start. What I did today was beyond unprofessional. I let my ego and my assumptions drive me to challenge someone whose skills I didn't understand and whose role I had no right to question. He looked at the distant hills where her shot had eliminated the mortar coordinator. You saved lives today. Possibly mine. Definitely others on this base. And I spent the morning treating you like you were incompetent. Kira set down her cleaning rod and looked at him directly. Gunny, your problem wasn't that you challenged me to shoot. Your problem was that you assumed I couldn't because of what you thought an armorer should be. You saw the job, not the person. You saw the gender, not the capability. That's a failure of leadership and professionalism that goes deeper than today's demonstration. The words hit Cutler visibly, each one landing with precision that matched her shooting. He nodded slowly, accepting the assessment without attempting to deflect or minimize. You're right. Completely right. I'll be addressing that with Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill shortly. I expect my time at this base is going to be very short. That's above my pay grade, Kira said. What I will say is that you're a competent shooter, Gunny. You made a good shot at 1,200 meters under observation pressure. That takes skill. But competence doesn't give you the right to diminish others or to assume you understand their capabilities based on superficial assessments. Whitmore had remained after most others had dispersed, watching the interaction from a respectful distance. When Cutler finally walked away toward Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill's office, Whitmore approached Kira's position. Staff Sergeant, I just want to say that what happened today changed how I think about assumptions. I watched you in the armory for weeks and thought I understood what I was seeing. Turns out I was missing about 90% of the picture. That's the nature of operational security, Corporal, Kira replied. You're supposed to see the cover, not what's underneath. The fact that it worked means I was doing my job correctly. Does this mean you're leaving? Going back to active sniper operations? Kira glanced at Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill, who was speaking with Captain Aldridge near the operations center. Hard to say. My cover's compromised, which limits my effectiveness here. But that's a decision for people above my rank. For now, I still have an armory to run and weapons to maintain. The base loudspeaker crackled to life with an announcement. All personnel, this is Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill. I want to personally commend the actions of Staff Sergeant Kira Brennan, whose exceptional skill and professionalism prevented a significant attack on this installation today. Her service exemplifies the highest standards of the Marine Corps. That is all. The announcement echoed across the base, carrying to every building and work area. It was unusual for a commanding officer to make such a specific commendation over general channels, but it served multiple purposes. It established the official narrative, acknowledged Kira's contribution, and sent a clear message about how her abilities should be regarded going forward. 3 weeks after the demonstration at Range 7, Forward Operating Base Sentinel had settled into a new normal that acknowledged realities that had always existed but were now visible. Kira still worked in the armory, still maintained weapons with meticulous precision, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Marines who brought their rifles for service now did so with a respect that bordered on reverence, often asking technical questions they would never have considered before. The morning sun cut through the armory windows as Kira inspected a batch of newly arrived rifles, checking each weapon for manufacturing defects before adding them to inventory. Chief Pack worked at his desk, processing requisition forms with the steady efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing military logistics. The familiar rhythm of armory work had returned, but underneath it ran currents of change that neither of them mentioned directly. Whitmore entered carrying a rifle that needed scope adjustment, but he hesitated at the counter in a way he never had before. Staff Sergeant, do you have time to look at this M4? The zero seems off, but I can't figure out why. Kira took the weapon and began her examination with practiced hands. The scope mount had loosened slightly, a common problem that most armorers would fix with a simple torque wrench. But Kira noticed something more, a slight cant in how the scope sat on the rail that suggested the mount itself was slightly warped. She replaced it with a new mount from inventory, torqued it to precise specifications, and handed it back within 10 minutes. Should be good now. Test it at the range, and let me know if you're still having issues. Whitmore accepted the rifle, then lingered. Can I ask you something, Staff Sergeant? About that day at the range. Kira set down her tools and gave him her full attention. Go ahead, Corporal. How do you deal with people making assumptions about you? About what you can or can't do based on what they see on the surface? She considered the question carefully. You focus on doing your job well and let your work speak for itself. Eventually, people either recognize competence or they don't. Their assumptions are their problem, not yours. She met his eyes directly, but you also stand up when it matters. You don't let other people's limitations define your capabilities. Whitmore nodded slowly, processing this." "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That helps more than you know." He left with his rifle, passing Lieutenant Colonel Thornhill, who was entering the armory with official-looking documents. "Staff Sergeant Brennan," Thornhill said formally, "I have your new assignment orders from SOCOM." She set the folder on the counter, her expression neutral, but her eyes showing something that might have been regret. "Your cover here has been sufficiently compromised that continuing in this role would provide limited operational benefit. You're being reassigned to a direct action unit where your skills can be utilized without the constraint of maintaining an alternate identity." Kira opened the folder and scanned the orders. Afghanistan, embedded with a Special Operations Task Force conducting high-value target elimination. It was the kind of assignment that most snipers dreamed about and that she had done multiple times before. Standard deployment cycle, 6 months in theater, then rotation back for training and equipment updates. "When do I ship out, ma'am?" 72 hours. Captain Aldridge will handle your security debriefing and ensure all classified materials are properly accounted for. She paused, then dropped the formal tone slightly. "For what it's worth, having you here improve this base's operational capability significantly. Not just the weapons maintenance, though that was exemplary. Your presence forced people to confront their assumptions and biases. That has value beyond any single mission. Appreciated, Mom. It's been an interesting assignment." "That's one way to describe it," Thornhill said with a hint of a smile. "Chief Pack will handle the armory transition. You're authorized to use these final days for personal preparation and ensuring all your operational equipment is properly configured." After Thornhill left, Chief Pack emerged from the back room, where he had been discreetly giving them privacy. "So you're moving on. Can't say I'm surprised, but the armory won't be the same without you. You've been running armories since before I enlisted, Chief. You'll manage fine." "True enough, but it's been an honor working with someone who operates at your level. Not many Marines ever get that opportunity." He extended his hand. "Fair winds and following seas, Staff Sergeant. May your shots always fly true." They shook hands with the kind of mutual respect that required no additional words. Pack returned to his paperwork, and Kira continued her inventory work, both of them comfortable with the professional silence that had always defined their working relationship. The following days brought a steady stream of visitors to the armory. Hastings and Volkov stopped by to wish her well, their earlier antagonism completely replaced by professional courtesy. Volkov brought a bottle of Russian vodka that technically violated base regulations, but which everyone pretended not to notice. Hastings offered advice about operating in the Afghan theater based on his own deployments, information that Kira accepted graciously despite having far more extensive experience in that environment than he did. Cutler's visit came last, on her final afternoon before departure. He entered the armory with none of his former swagger, moving with the careful uncertainty of someone still processing a fundamental reevaluation of self-image. "Staff Sergeant, I know you're leaving soon. I wanted to say goodbye and to thank you." "Thank me for what, Gunny?" "For the lesson. The hard one that I needed, but wouldn't have accepted from anyone else." He looked around the armory, seeing it differently now. "I put in for transfer to a training unit stateside. Figure I could do more good teaching the next generation than pretending I'm something I'm not in an operational theater. And maybe I can teach them not to make the assumptions I made." "That's good, Gunny. Teaching matters. Passing on knowledge and experience to people who need it. That's valuable work." Cutler nodded, then extended his hand. "I genuinely hope your next assignment goes well. And I hope the people you work with have the sense to recognize what they've got from day one." She shook his hand briefly. "Take care of yourself, Gunny. And maybe next time you meet someone who seems quiet or unassuming, consider that there might be more to the story than what's visible on the surface." After he left, Kira finished her final equipment checks and secured her personal gear. The Macmillan TC-50 was already packed for transport, along with her specialized ammunition and equipment that most Marines never saw. Tomorrow she would leave forward operating Base Sentinel behind, moving on to the next assignment in a career that had taken her to dozens of locations across multiple continents. A young female private entered the armory carrying a rifle for routine cleaning. She moved with the careful uncertainty of someone new to military service, and she watched Kira work with an intensity that suggested she was seeing something significant. "Ma'am, can I ask what your MOS is? Your job specialty?" "I'm an armorer," Kira replied simply. "I maintain weapons systems and ensure operational readiness." The private looked at the specialized equipment visible in Kira's work area, the precision tools and technical manuals that went far beyond standard armory requirements. "Just an armorer?" Kira smiled slightly. "Sometimes the job title doesn't tell the whole story, Private. Sometimes what matters is doing the work that needs to be done, regardless of what people expect or assume." She handed back the cleaned rifle. "Your weapon's ready. Maintain it well, and it'll serve you well." If this story resonated with you, drop a comment and let us know what moment stood out most. Maybe you've known someone who revealed unexpected abilities, or perhaps you've been underestimated yourself. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. The private left with her rifle, and Kira returned to her final preparations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new missions, but today she finished her work at Forward Operating Base Sentinel with the same quiet professionalism that had defined her time there. The assumptions had been confronted, the lessons had been learned, and somewhere in the distant hills, enemy forces would think twice before planning operations within range of American installations, haunted by stories of impossible shots from an invisible sniper they called Phantom.